For today, the main topic is called, it's very known as eFTI, which is Electronic Freight Transport Information, and we're trying to assess how to position this in the freight and logistics sector. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a short introduction where I'm going to introduce Alice a little bit because we have also non-Alice members in this open webinar. And afterwards, I'll give the floor to Leah Potec from the European Commission to tell you more about the EU regulation on electronic freight transport information, which is also known as eFTI or FT. And afterwards, Alexio Picco from Circle Group, he's going to focus on the FT challenges for the transportation logistics sector. And he's going to focus mainly on the common data sets, harmonized connections, and integration of existing IT systems for business to business and business to authorities. And afterwards, we can actually pick the chat box questions, or we can also have a discussion where you can actually open your mic and pose your question directly. So what's Alice, or who is Alice? Alice is the Alliance for Logistics Innovation through Collaboration in Europe. It's an alliance of more than 160 organizations, which covers different stakeholder groups. This ranges from shippers, retailers, LSPs, terminals, ports, IT consultancy firms, RTOs, which are research and technology centers, etc. So you can see the overview here. We are also onboarding 7 or 9 new members, also with some big names. So there's actually more companies and organizations to come. So there's a lot more to look forward to. And Alice has a lot of faces. So let's put some faces on the Alice board. So the main chair and vice chairs are Sergio, Francois, and Nick. But we have also a lot of organizations and their leaders who represent their companies within different thematic groups, ranging from TG1, which is on the left, and all the way to TG5, which concerns urban logistics on the right. All of this work and all of this industry leadership is actually facilitated then by the Alice Secretariat, which is led by Fernando, who's the Secretary General, and I also fall under this group together with my colleagues. And we have also some new colleagues starting from 2 weeks ago, which is Maximo and Stephanie. They do not have faces yet, but they do in real life, of course. So we will try to add them later on as well. So for the main vision of Alice, the main vision concerns, I also call it the Northern Star that we follow, is the physical internet. So what is the physical internet? The main objective is to actually induce modal shift from roads to inland waterways or railways, and this can be achieved through interoperability, interconnection, harmonization of existing standards and solutions when it comes to digital layers, but also physical layers as well. So this is our common vision. This is our common Northern Star. And to achieve this, there's not actually one single company that can do this. Therefore, the C in Alice stands for collaboration, and all the companies and organizations, they need to work and co-create together. So if you are a company or an organization that wants to go fast, you can of course go alone, but if you want to go far, we need to work and collaborate together to achieve the objectives of the Green Deal, which stems from the Paris Agreement, and to utilize the underutilized assets, increase capacities, and induce the before mentioned modal shift to more sustainable modes of transportation, which also decreases CO2 emissions, externalities, etc., etc. Now, this can be done also with the Alice membership and the Alice base that we have. So in case you would like to work together, if you're interested in one of our TGs or multiple TGs, feel free to visit the website and see what we can work together on as well. As I said before, Alice is structured in 5 TGs, but besides these 5 TGs, we have also other horizontal programs, which concerns the influence program, the knowledge management sharing, and also the support collaboration program. Each TG, which is TG1, TG2, TG3, TG4, and TG5, there's actually a lot of subgroups and sub-activities that you can see over here. And the way we position the FT webinar is that it falls under TG3, which concerns systems and technologies for interconnected logistics. And here more specifically, we have a group led by Jon Kuiper from the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure. He unfortunately could not be here today, but this one covers data sharing, DTLF, and eFTI. But besides that, we also focus on data spaces and data marketplaces as well, which is going to come in the upcoming quarter. Besides that, we have also the knowledge management program where we organize info sessions and webinars. Hence, we are here today to discuss the FT regulation. which is going to be conveyed by Leah and Alexio. We also store all the information in the knowledge platform so we can actually follow up and potentially cross-fertilize with what's going on in your organizations. And more importantly, what's going to happen in Q2 is the IPIC conference, and afterwards next year there's the TRA conference. So this is a warm invitation to visit the IPIC conference website, which is going to take place this year in Athens between the 13th and the 15th of June. And this is organized together with Alice and our local partner, which is ICCS in Greece. And the next one is TRA in Dublin. So Alice is also on the management committee, but also on the program committee. And we would like to inform you that the TRA call for submissions of abstracts has opened as well. So you have time until next month. So feel free to already prepare your submissions there as well. TRA is quite a big conference this year. The expectation is to accommodate around 3,500 people. So this is also organized by the European Commission as well. Now, we are here today focusing on the FTE regulation. What's important to know that next week, we will also have an UNCFACT and DCSA webinar, which is going to be conveyed by Hanan Bishop. UNCFACT is quite relevant because FT is going to be connected or should be connected to the global standards of UNCFACT. This is something that potentially I can address, or Alexio, how far this is or not. And the day afterwards, we'll also have a webinar on the inland waterway transportation, where we're going to reap the benefits of the MobiMove and IWT Net European projects. And here it's quite crucial to understand that how FT regulation could potentially be linked to the RIS directive, etc. So some of you might know, and some of you also attended the IWT week, which is taking place as we speak in Brussels. So there were some mentionings of the FT regulation as well, and we will try to pick that up afterwards. This is finally my last slide, and then I'm going to shut up finally. So what's DTLF? DTLF stands for the Digital Transport and Logistics Forum, and is divided into two subgroups. So the group on the right side is group number 2, and this one concerns the federated network of platforms, also known as the Corridor Freight Information System or systems. And here there were two main projects commissioned. One is Federated and the second one is Phoenix. So most of the Alice members also attended the Phoenix final event at PNG premises a few weeks ago. So you know about Phoenix as well. And Federated is about to finish in the upcoming 7 months, I believe. But Phoenix is finishing actually this month. This is also in a way the continuation, which can be perceived as a link to the common European mobility data space, which is on the strategic agenda of the European Commission as well. And on the left side, we see the subgroup number 2, which concerns the FT regulation. And just to mention, DTLF is quite an influential forum, which consists of different members, which is Type C, where Alice is involved as well with IPCSA, and altogether there's around 87 members in this group. And Type D concerns all the member states in the EU. And Type E, you also see the Flemish waterways, and I see also Jeff Bowens is in the call as well. So hi, Jeff. And also the other entities that you can see in the left bottom corner. Okay, so FT, I'm going to now stop sharing my screen. I'm going to give the floor to Leah. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to drop them in the chat box. Yep. So welcome everybody and enjoy the info session.
Good morning, and thank you, Tomas, for organizing, or you and your colleagues at Alice to organizing this this webinar. Indeed, the FTI regulation, it's gathering more and more exposure, and people are getting more and more interested in knowing what it is about, how will it impact it. So I think this is a very good moment to start indeed clarifying that. As I'll explain later, the regulation is not yet fully applicable. We're still working on the detailed implementation specifications, but it is coming, and it will be coming soon, and hopefully it will have a big impact. And that's also something that we will be we can discuss a bit on how we see it having an impact beyond just the more narrow purposes, so to say, of the regulation. Before I go on to explain to you what the regulation is about, I would like to give you a very brief background of why we have the regulation in the first place. And that will start with the impact assessment. So if we move to the next slide, the impact assessment is basically a study that the Commission is required to carry out before putting forward proposals in a policy domain. We need to, if a problem is identified that is impacting generally the good functioning of the internal markets, whatever or whatever else is in the competence of the European Union to act at policy level, then we will be looking at taking a closer look at it to understand what exactly is causing that problem and how that problem could be solved and what would be the most appropriate means. Sometimes it can just be some guidelines or some recommendations, but often that results in legislation, because when we're really undertaking impact assessment, it's because the problem is already identified as quite serious and may require actually legal intervention at EU level. Now, when it comes to the eFTI regulation, the problem that was flagged to us, and it was actually in the DTLF that was raised, was that in spite of the fact that IT the IT was out there for quite some time now, it's been taking more and more advances in all sectors of the economy. The logistics sector was still lagging behind in the use of it, and in particular for sharing the information along the different actors. And main focus was that we decided it needs to start with the digitalization of the transport documents. But we then clarified which are most important, and we identified that probably if we start with the transport contracts, that would make a huge difference for the economic operators. So we in any case looked closer, and we realized that what is causing that issue? Why is the use of digital transport documents more widespread than would be expected? And it turned out that the core of it was the fact that the authorities, which required also to have a look at those documents for different rule enforcement purposes, were not accepting electronic format of those documents. Or if that was accepted, it was in a rather unpredictable way. We wouldn't really know where it would be accepted, in which country, by which authority, because that varied. Even in the same country, some authorities might accept an electronic version, but others not. And that, of course, had a knockdown effect on other actors. Banks and insurance companies then would not be willing to accept electronic documents, particularly because they were afraid they would not be enforceable in court as contracts. And then that meant also that other actors in the logistics chain, carriers, shippers, forwarders, also wouldn't trust working with them, and therefore there you are. It's nobody would be willing to really adopt them. At the same time, and there was while there were coming up some IT solutions, we all probably have heard of a number of ECMR solution providers. Still, and that was already quite some years ago in 2017, not so widespread, but there were solutions actually for all transport modes, but still they were not taken up, also because there was not a single standard, and nobody would know, which one would eventually, what solution would be acceptable, because they were using different, as I said, different implementation standards, and nobody really was very willing to invest in an IT solution, knowing that they would need to use both paper and electronic, and second, they wouldn't know if the IT solution they would subscribe for would be the one that eventually would gain most market acceptance, or would be interoperable with other IT solutions that would be used by other actors. So those were the issues that we encountered, and it was concluded that in the end, there was indeed a need to act at EU level, in particular in order to target the acceptance by the authorities in a uniform way across the EU, but also to try to provide also certain specifications as regards the use of the IT. So that's, if we are moving on to the next slide, please. That was also what were the objectives of our regulation: to ensure the uniform acceptance by public authorities across the EU, and at the same time the interoperability of the IT solutions that are used for exchanging the information electronically, at least when it comes to the information that is included in the transport documents. Now, you may also wonder what information, because we're not really covering, at least with the FTI regulation for the moment, we're not covering all transport documents, but rather we are covering information that is in the cargo documents, those that describe the goods, where from where they are being transported to where, by what means, possibly how they're packed. So this is the general type of information. But again, we're not specifying which documents, but rather we're looking at the information that is required by the legislation, because the focus of the regulation is the acceptance by the authorities and the exchange of the information electronically between the operators and the authorities. I think it's important to note at this point that the regulation does not cover the exchange of the information between businesses. Businesses can continue to exchange that information in whatever form they want, but we have been told that if we set up a standard for the exchange of the information between the businesses and the authorities, then those standards will also be taken up in the business-to-business exchanges. However, it is wiser to leave the businesses to also use other standards, for example, if they feel fit for other purposes. So that's why the scope of the regulation covers only the exchange of the information between the operators and the authorities. Now, if we move to the next slide, you'll also see that we have a very clear scope when it comes to the information. What I mentioned, it's information that is required in order to prove compliance with legislation. And it's both EU legislation, but also national legislation, when that national legislation also requires the same type of information. And maybe for some of you, if not all of you, at least the EU legislation that we are looking at might be familiar with the Combined Transport Directive. I'm sure you know the route cabotage regulation also, but also covering also dangerous goods on all transport modes, but also waste, the transport of waste, and we're also looking at the aviation security. We're also having the Rail Interoperability Directive there. Though right now it's not effectively under the scope, because there are no requirements for information to be provided by the authorities. But in case under that directive there would be added some, then we have a placeholder and it will be covered. The national legislation, we're in the process currently of identifying it. It's almost there, because each member state has a number of legal acts that also require the same information, and we wanted to make sure that the operators will not be required to present information on paper format because of the national legal requirement. So that is why we're covering both the EU and national legislation. Now, coming back to the obligation of the authorities, so what the regulation says is that the authorities are obliged to accept the information when presented electronically in a format that is prescribed in the regulation. So but at the same time, the operators they are not obliged to use the electronic format. They could still continue to use paper to see how it's going, etc. But if they want to already take the opportunity and go digital, then they would need to use the format required by the regulation, at least to be sure that the authorities will accept that information. What is also important to say is that we also have requirements for the authorities to put in place their own systems that will also comply with common rules set at EU level. So basically, regardless of which member state would check this information, so that they would not be setting their own specifications of what the electronic format should be, but rather they need to comply with these common EU rules. And I think this is very, very important, because basically, no matter where a transport is being carried out within the EU, either that it comes from the outside the EU and to a point within the EU, or it's from the EU and travels outside, or it's just within the EU, or even crossing the EU, but it still falls under the these legal requirements, the EU and member states that they are crossing, then they should be able to present it in the same format. So it's just one way. They keep it in this electronic format as prescribed by the regulation. And basically, it's just very simply, you need to use what we call FT platforms. We'll mention a bit later. And then any authority in any member state should be able to read it in that format. And they should not require any other specific specificities for that. Now, just one last point on the FT platforms. So the operators will, the regulation says that the operators can keep their data in any system that complies with the requirements of the regulation and the more detailed specifications that will be adopted, and also that get a certification of that. So there is also a requirement for certification. It's a very clear certification process as well described in the regulation. And that certificate for the platforms, but also the service providers that would use that platform, they also need to be certified according to certain requirements, also set in the regulation. So this certification can be obtained, and it needs to be obtained only from a organization that is accredited for that purpose in one of the member states. And then that certification, once obtained in one of the EU member states for this FT platform or FT service provider, then it's basically recognized all across the EU. So that's also important, that there is no need for a repeat certification of these platforms. It's one so operators can keep their information on one platform in one format. That platform needs only one certification on the member states, and then it can be presented to the authorities from that platform in any of the EU member states. That's it for the requirements of the regulation. So they're rather simple, but now we need to still work the more detailed implementation specifications to ensure what we said, the interoperability, the fact that both the FT platforms, which are to be mostly owned and run by the economic operators, either big logistics operator can have their own platform if they can afford to maintain it and certify it, maintain it, etc. Or most of them will be probably run by IT service providers that then would be providing on that basis services based on a certain fee to allow the operators to keep their data there and to share it with the authorities. If we move on to the next slide, please. Yes. That's what would be, what do we see that it should happen in practice. So basically, we'll have to start from the right top corner, where the data is being stored on an FT platform. The FT platform is depicted as the green circle within these various forms there, because an FT platform is not required to be an entity on its own. It can be integrated either to the ERP system of a big company, or it can be part of the wider platforms of an IT service provider, where other data and other services are provided. But that part that deals with the information requirements covered by the FT regulation, and to make it available to the authorities, it needs to be certified, so that's is depicted there in green. And what there it's also shown, it's the B2B information exchange environment, because we also envisage that these FT platforms, the information that is kept there is basically information, what I said earlier: who is the consigner, who is the consignee, who is the carrier, what description of the goods, quantity, etc. This data can also be shared business to business. There is no just an exclusivity, you just upload it there only for the authorities. No, it is also can have multiple uses. In addition, and what is important to also bear in mind, is the data needs not to be sent to the authorities. It's on FT platform, it's there, and needs to be presented to the authorities only upon request. If an authority either stops a transport and says, and that's what we have depicted on this slide. So they stop a transport and say, I'm interested, I need to know what you're carrying. You need to present me the transport documents or the transport information, because I need to check if you're compliant with that or that other rule. And only on that moment, the data will be accessed. And the way we see it is basically, and how the regulation also describes it already, is that the information is to be available primarily by the means of a unique identification link. So basically, a URL can imagine that is, for practical reasons, transformed in a QR code or other machine readable format that can condense the information. And that can be passed along the chain, and with that link, basically, the different actors, depending on their authorizations for accessing or processing the data, both business to business, but then also authorities can access it. So this is where we are here, right? You have the link. It's being passed from the shipper, let's say, to a carrier. Carrier gets the link, checks it, maybe adds some information if needed, and then they go on. They may transfer the information if the goods are being transferred from one mode to another. And eventually, if they are stopped, then they need to provide this link to the authorities that, but through their own devices, should be able to read that link and have access via back office systems to directly to the platform where the information is there. So to read it, but again, based on their authorizations. So they have to have authorization, and that's also kept there in the systems of the authorities. So that clarifies for what data actually they can see, because that link can have behind it a large amount of data, but the authorities, there is a specific enforcement officer would be able to see only those data elements that are linked to their authorization and nothing else. And I think this is also very, very important to bear in mind. So this is when the data is accessed. Okay, so not, as I said, pushed, sent to the authorities every time a transport operation takes place. No, it can stay there. It may never be checked, but in case it is, it's only when there is a specific request for access to that data that happens. Right now, during the process of reflecting on the more detailed implementation specifications, we realized that it is important to also allow a request for access to data based on just reading, for example, the number plate of a truck, or knowing the identification number of a train or a barge or plane, and with that to query and find out what is the unique identification link of the data on that specific means of transport, and then be accessed also. But it's again on request, and that should be indicated that this is a remote access request, and not because the vehicle was stopped and driver or pilot or whoever was asked for the information. So that is also something that we are currently envisaging, and then once we have that more clear, we'll explain that. Now, if we move to the next slide, please. Just to give you a bird's eye view of the overall EU environment. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Basically, that is the top part is the part covered by, it's what the authorities need to put in place. And we envisage that they, all the authorities in the different member states will need to connect to a national level, via which basically their requests are then redirected to the right FT platforms. Whereas for the economic operators, basically they just need to have their data on one FT platform. And the principle, the way of thinking right now for the architecture is that one FT platform is required to be connected to only one national gate, which also is interesting to note that several member states could decide to have a common gate, in which case, but in any case, one platform is connected to only one gate. And then these gates support a search mechanism that will allow to identify, based on the unique identification link, which is the right platform and which is the set of data that they need access on the respective platform. But also, I know that Alexio will tell you a bit more about it, so we can come back also later on this. But this is how we envisage that would be the high level architecture at EU level. So we have what we call these FT gates that are mediating the exchange of information between the operators and the authorities. Now, if we move to the next slide, that's basically the timeline of the implementation. The ambition was that by February 2023, which has just passed, we would have had already adopted the first implementation specifications, both related to the data model because all the information requirements that we're talking about, they are being translated into a data model. We call it data in the regulations called FT data subsets, which correspond to each legislation. But then we also have a common data set to ensure that all the data elements that are common everywhere, they're the same. So we don't have to have consigner described in 10 times because there are 10 legislation that refer to consigner, but that's just one consigner one way. And the rest the same address, they all in the same format. So that would be that would have one of the specifications that we need to adopt, and the others were the specifications for the systems to be put in place by the member states. That were by the February. We're delayed, so now it looks like we will be adopting them by the summer. Then we also need to adopt specifications for the FT platforms and the service providers. Again, that was planned for August, but looking at the calendar, likely we're going to be able to do that more realistically now by November this year. And then as of August next year, the the IT service providers and platform and developers of platforms can start applying for the certification in accordance to those specifications. In the meantime, we'll also need to adopt some rules for the certification. That should be quite that would be rather easy because we once we have figured out what exactly we want to certify. Now, that's still not the end of the story because the member states will still have more time to prepare because they have a firm obligation to accept the information electronically and their systems need to be ready. Whereas, as I said, for the operators, it's on a voluntary basis. So the authorities will have more time, which is actually linked to the adoption by the Commission of the first implementation specifications. And that's basically they have exactly 2.5 years from when the Commission adopts the specifications that they need to implement, and they have 2.5 years. So initially that was August 2025, but since we're going to adopt later, that is more likely to be December 2025 or the latest early 2026. Then when basically the authorities are all obliged to accept the information electronically when provided via FT platforms. Which doesn't mean that if some member states are ready earlier and they want to accept it earlier, they can also do so. Once we have FT platform certified, F service providers, and they make it available to, the authorities are also ready on their side, they can also apply it on a voluntary basis as well. But as of end of 2025, all member states should be ready and their officers be equipped with the necessary tools to check the data electronically. Now, the review, just maybe to say that it's a review foreseen to assess, on the one hand, whether to make the regulation obligatory also for the operators, basically to oblige all the operators to use electronic, not to leave it anymore optional, and also how to ensure that the FTI regulation is interoperable with other systems for information that is required by the authorities to check during transport, like driving licenses or other licenses, for pilots, etc. The licenses for the vehicles. So, so if there's to see how we could ensure that the authorities only make one check, one request, and then in the background, the different IT systems are connected, and they give them all the information without bothering the operators to provide them separately. So that's it on the regulation. My last slide is about the expected costs and benefits. Basically, for the economic operators, the estimates were that they would require about 4.4 billion investment, but basically to cover all the businesses in all the EU. And at the time, or even with the UK when we conducted the study, so that would be the investment costs, but in the IT systems and adapting the processes. But the benefits are would be offsetting those costs, because we really expect that there will be high savings on administrative costs. for the operators, primarily coming from work hours that are put now on administrative issues, right? Filling in these forms. Yeah, you do it on computer, but then you print them, then you have to pass them on to the next actor. They need to copy that data again in their computer most of the time. Maybe there are also mistakes, etc., in copying. So there are lots of time, but also cost related that would be saved. And of course, we also expect that there will be by standardizing the data requirements, the information exchange, but also the systems that would ensure more interoperability, and then this data. I mean, there will be a bit of a snowball effect that would encourage more digitalization, the use of in the sector to exchange information, and not just as specified by the FTI regulation, but also other information. Also for the authorities, there will be some cost, of course, because they also need to invest in their in systems to check. But also for them would be some the advantages of being able to move towards a more risk-based checks that would be more efficient and smart, but also statistics, etc. Finally, indeed, we also expect that simply by giving facilitating better visibility along the supply chain through real-time data available in standardized format, then there will be optimization of course of logistics, which should lead to perhaps less trucks, for example, driving empty, right? So better optimization of cargo transport, and therefore less emissions, as well as simply paper saved from that is no longer be printed, and therefore trees saved. So these are the direct effects that are expected, but as I said, we also expect that maybe there will be wider ones that have not been calculated that would stem from simply facilitating the digital transformation of the sector. And with this, I have ended my pitch, and I look forward to seeing the reactions. Here the last slide is just some links to where we can find more information if interested.
Thank you very much, Leah. Super informative. I have learned a lot as well, even though I knew something about FT, but now I know even more, which is great. There are some questions already in the chat box by Eric, Phil, and Elvina. I propose that we keep them for the Q&A session and give the floor now to Alexio. Leah, in case you feel like it, and if you feel confident already, you can reply those comments in the chat box. If you prefer to address them in the Q&A session, we can do that as well. It's up to you. Now, Alexio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Do you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, my name is Alexio Picco. I'm the managing director of the Circle Group, and I have also the honor and the privilege to work with Leah and DG Move in this adventure, let me say, of FT since almost a couple of years. So thanks to Alice to organize this very useful webinar. We thought, also discussing with the friends in Alice, that it was the right time to do it, because as Leah was introducing, we are close to the first implementing and delegated act to be ready, and that's really the moment in which we need to create a bit more awareness of what FT is and what FT could be. And that is my role, mainly also could be, is my role for today. In fact, since the very beginning of this story, as many of the people working with me know very well, I always say that FT could be really a game changer if it is seen not strictly for only what is related and in scope with the regulation, but it could be something that could be very useful for supporting the digital transformation in the supply chain. My presentation today is mainly focused on that, meaning that my perspective, I'm trying to give the perspective of the economic operators, meaning the freight forwarders, the shippers, or the road hauliers, and the train operators and multimodal transport operators mainly. Okay, so you will probably see that I have some slides that, in a way, they are also covering things already covered by Leah, but with some highlight in yellow, because I want again to give the perspective of the economic operators. And then at the end, in order to explain at least the vision that we have, and it is also a vision that at least some member states, they are trying to follow, how this FT could be really useful for this digital transformation in the supply chain. This is a slide exactly taken from the presentation from Leah, but the stress is that FT is talking about interoperability, is about interoperability of IT system and solutions, and it is about reducing administrative costs. So one of the way to do that is to try to extend the potentiality of the digital exchange, again, not only to the FT related, strictly related data, but a bit more than that, and you will see later on. These are the main frame in terms of time. Maybe August will become December, as Leah was saying, and this is taken from the regulation in a way. And I underline two things. One is that the use of certified FT providers, mentioned also by Leah, because they are a key actor, because this FT provider can be used as a FT provider, but they are in a way certified platforms, being the platform of the operator or a service provider, but they are platforms that are certified with a certain level of guarantee in terms of safety, security, or whatever, digital exchange and trust and whatever, governance, and they can be used also for other things. And in the scope, I put also a little bit more. The part in red is not from the regulation in a way, but it's my further interpretation. So the regulation should be used to harmonize the legal and also a little bit of a technical framework for the electronic information communication, not only in relation, again, strictly to the data that are in scope of the regulation itself. The regulation, it is about everything that should be information on cargo transport that must be carried on board in the different transport mode, with the exception of maritime, that is covered by the European Maritime Single Window Environment Regulation for whatever it is, whatever they are, the so-called reporting formalities, the evolution of Directive 65. And so meaning road, rail, waterway, and air transport. But again, the potentiality is not strictly limited to this. Even if then maritime is not covered by this, ports are multimodal platforms, and ports are dealing with road, rail, and inland water-based transport. So in a way, ports that are key nodes of our networks, they are affected in a way by FT, even if the real maritime side is covered by another regulation. The set of data elements was mentioned, and it will be part of the delegated text, the first delegated text. And also in this case, the work that we are doing together with the Commission in order to see which is the minimum set of data that are strictly in line in scope of the regulation, is as much as we can, let's say, a bottom-up approach. Working with member states, moving from information from provisions to information requirements, and then to set of data and data elements and data model. And the minimum set will be exactly the minimum that is in line with the purpose of exchanging regulatory information between economic operators and between economic operators and competent authorities. But again, in this case, most probably the use of an extended model, UNCFAT for sure can be one, that is covering even more than that, could be an harmonized way to proceed. This has to be set for what is will be the regulation. It will be what is in the scope of the regulation. But of course, in terms of business development and in terms of support to the freight and logistics, a larger data model could be useful for what I'm saying and what I will show you later. Of course, operators are not obliged to make regulatory information. This is important, very important. Why? They are going to move to digital if they see an advantage. That is for sure. If they don't see an advantage, they are not going to move. And one of the way in which they can see an advantage is if they have economic benefits or operational, let's say, organizational benefit. And how? If they can, let me say, maybe exaggerating a bit, but giving, let's say, the vision, if they can in one shot send in once all the digital data that are related to transport, that is not only, of course, what is FT related, once, and they send this to an FT savvy provider, or they use their own certified platform, and then it is this platform that is dispatching whatever is FT to the FT gate, to the FT architecture, to the FT environment, whatever is not FT, in another way. This is the other way is really member state related, because the way in which the systems are interoperable, the existence of national systems covering this and that is quite diverse. But the concept is the same. So the key here is the role of the certified FT platform. It's important to just on only one slide on the authority side, because and I stress only one point on this. That is the confidentiality of information. So the architecture that is going to be described in the implementing act, the first implementing act is an architecture that shall be able to maintain information confidential with a certain level of security. In order that could be trusted as a neutral platform, in a way in which data are, shared more than stored, in a way that they cannot be, gathered in a non, let's say, regular way, let me say. And again, on the side of the FT platform, for which the specifications and the related implementing that will come later during this year, beginning next year. Also, in this case, business data remain confidential, and there is this concept already mentioned by the unique electronic identification link that can be used to retrieve data between a consignment and the related data element. And again, on the side of the service provider, that is the other side of the coin of the FT platform. When the FT platform is developed and certified within the ERP of a certain economic operator, or if the economic operator is using a service provider, the data are adequately protected against unauthorized and unlawful processing, accident loss, destruction of damage. This is, of course, a key point in order to have a certain level of trust and say, okay, I'm going to give a pack of data, and this data are treated in the way that should be. So in a way, even for the economic operators, that can be an opportunity if they see the benefit, and if they can share data at source, retaining their sovereignty on data and somehow to withdraw access to their own data. It's important to see further extension. One is this one, but what I'm going to focus later on in a number of diagrams, it's even a little bit more than that. So sharing once a full set of digital data to be used for very different purposes. And in this case, eFTI could be really a step towards, let's say, 100% digital data sharing project. It could be a game changer, as I mentioned this morning. And it is totally in line with also one of the two big, strands of work of the TLF, meaning the Federation of Systems, the Federated EU Data Sharing Architecture. And it is also, in a way, one of the pillar of the future EU mobility data space, could be, of course, in which participants will trust each other because they agree on identity, authentication, and access policies. There is a huge work, believe me, in terms of understanding how those functionalities on identification, authentication, authorization has to be done. Also, in terms of what is already existing at European level and reusing what is existing at European or national level, that is somehow, as usual, a little bit diverse and fragmented. And the data model, the extended data model, I may say, it will be the common alphabet and the common language that should facilitate, harmonize any certain interoperability in terms of semantics. So let's go to try to give some examples. I try to make it very simple, okay, to understand what I mean in terms of opportunity for FT being a potential game changer. So this is really the baseline. You know, this is an extracting away from the current draft of the eFTI architecture environment. This is really a baseline in which an economic operator is sending the eFTI data set to an FT platform, meaning or including in their own system or service provider, and then this is exchanged with an EFT gate, and the competent authority could access it, and whenever it is the case. Of course, there is also, in order to make it simple, I didn't put the exchange of data between member states through the FT gate, but this is, of course, a possibility and an option. It's a possibility. It will be a functionality. It's not an option. Sorry. So, but the same could be, of course, used FT platform to FT platform, meaning the data, the exchange of data, and here we start to think. We can also think and to start to think about something that is not only the minimum set of data that are required for FT. They can exchange with economic operators, with other economic operators. This is the case of the let me say of the parent of the closest parent to FT being the ECMR, that is more business to business exchange of information, for instance. But then there are also other let's say eFTI related things that are not only the simple transport documents on railroad, air, and inland waterways, but there is everything that is related to dangerous goods that should pass through this. Customs could be, again, an extension in terms of data that are requested from customs, not in scope of FT, for other purposes. I'm a little bit more aware of this environment than others for the work that as a circle group we have been doing in the multimodal supply chain with customs, and I know that there are plenty of data, digital data already that are required by, for instance, by the national single windows in different member states. That could be also exchanged through an FT service provider. But it can even be more. This could be used to exchange with port community system. There is also the possibility that the port community system itself will become an FT platform, part of it, or they will also act as, that's also another possibility, but it's another possibility. But in terms of exchange of data, exactly for the reason I mentioned before, that in ports you have railroad and inland waterways, coming and exchanging cargo with the maritime sector, the exchange of data also with port community systems that are also then acting at the port community to deliver data in the port system. This could be an opportunity, but also others. There are, let's say, potential coverage also exchanging data with the related platform exchanging data for the TAF TSI platform, that is the one managed by the infrastructure railway infrastructure managers. It could be river information services, of course. It could be other platform for trade facilitations in Europe and not in Europe. There are a number of corridors, trade facilitation corridors between Europe and non-European countries that could be facilitated by a bunch of data sent once by the economic operators and then redistributed. So this is the in a way, the vision that we have in terms of make the EFT platform, let's say, more attractive for economic operators in order to have more benefits. What's the next steps in order to go for? For sure, economic operators, they need support in that. Huh? Member states also. Member states are, you know, in a way covered by a number of initiatives, or partially covered by a number of initiatives that are ongoing to support them in order to establish the FTA, the architecture, let's say the upper level. Then we need also to do a number of things with the economic operators. The level of awareness of these things is really different in different member states. Through the let's say work that we are doing together with the Commission, we had the opportunity to interface all the 27 member states for this, and we know that the level of awareness is different. But of course, now there is the possibility to move towards doing something for supporting economic operators to understand the frame and to potentially to discuss with them their potential benefits and how to tune the vision, because what I described to you is a vision, to describe them and to support them in having the maximum benefit from this. And this means understanding the preparation of what is going on in the different member states, because the way in which member states are transposing FT per se, but also the extended FT architecture I explained is different. I know a bit of a number of member states. I have not a clear idea on all 27, of course, but in many of them I have a clear idea. Of course, in my country, likely better than others, but. For instance, I can say that in Italy, this is the vision to have FT as a potential opportunity to share data for other things. Economic operators need support also in terms of assessing their position, in terms of the interoperability within their national, and okay, there is also international things, cabotage, but start from national. They have to understand their national and transport and logistic evolution of the different systems, cost of single wind, port community system, river information services, number of logistic single window, logistic national platforms. In different places, they are called differently. Sorry, I hear some music. I don't know where it's coming from. Okay, sorry. Then again, they need support and understanding how the FT implementation is going on in terms of and how the implementing act and the delegating that, when the data model will be there, when the technical specification will be there, how they can transpose quickly in benefits and let's say and something that could be useful. And of course, using also a number of lessons learned from the initiatives ongoing. The first pilot that are already running, some that will come, and things like that. It's important to have a national communication and awareness campaign on FT at national level, for sure, in many countries, and a specific workshop that, I mean, started from something that could be very similar to the one that we had this morning, in order to progress and to have a better understanding. And you know, the very end to achieve the very end, you know, business goal that I sought since the first time that I read about FT. So making this a success, that is what we are working for and we are striving for. So thank you very much, and of course I'm available for questions. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexio, also from our side. So I would propose there's also quite a good discussion happening in the chat box. Let's go to the beginning, following the FIFO approach. So first in, first out. So the first in terms of questions was Eric. So Eric, I would like to give the floor to you to ask the question, because it doesn't make sense I read out the questions if you are here, also the others.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Question to Leah. And you were saying that the information that is put on the FT platform is only exposed to the authorities at the moment control takes place, not in beforehand. So, and that was my question, because I thought that some of the economic operators thought it was a good idea to really share that already with the authorities, the information that is on the FT platform about certain transport, so that authorities could see, okay, we don't have to stop them, we don't have to do a control, because from the data we can see everything is okay, and it is safe to let them pass without interruption. Is that something that is still possible, or do you say, yeah, it's difficult to do that because then we have to push or at least let know to the authorities that data is available?
Thank you, Eric, for this question. It's a indeed very pertinent one, and I think it also links to a question that was put later, or a comment made later by Joost Narsens from Cefic. And the short answer is that we are considering this possibility, and at this stage of thinking, I think it's actually also very likely that we will be enabling it via the implementation specifications. But it's important to bear in mind that right now there is not a clear legal basis for having this kind of pre-checks done on the transport. But there is nonetheless, I mean, it's coming up, because before the legislation didn't require that, because there was no way to have this data available in advance. But now, indeed, we are creating the opportunities, and probably also the legal basis will expand later on. But at this moment in time, what we envisage is that indeed there can be a sort of a push of data, but not so much of the data that is on the FT platforms, but rather of an indication that there is data on an FT platform that is linked to this vehicle currently underway, so it's transporting. And if you are interested in the information on the cargo that's being transported, you can already check it as authorities. So the authorities indeed could, without stopping a vehicle, now we're talking about road, but it can also be barge they see passing by. So they check based on a visual identifier of the means of transport, most likely. Then they can make a query, which would be going via the systems of FT gates, where basically also that's the repository where the FT platforms would need to push this information. So they would check, is there a unique identification link for information that related to an active transport operation for this means of transport? And if that's a reply, they can also, then they get the link, and then they make the request. I would like to have access to the data on related to this link, based on these authorizations, because I'm entitled to check this and that and that. So that would be possible. That's what we envisage, because indeed the regulation requires that the economic operators make available the information to the authorities based on the unique identification link, without saying that the unique identification link should be made available only when stopped. That unique identification link can also be made in advance, as we said, pushed, but it's only the link pushed, not the data, just the link, and then the authorities can check if and as I explained, then could also access the data. And then they can decide all is fine, then they're not going to stop the transport. However, of course, if they see that there are irregularities, then of course they will also they would stop that vehicle. So that does.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
But again, I think it's important to note that probably fines, if there is something wrong, fines will not be applied without stopping the vehicle and checking basically also physically that transport. So just getting a fine on the basis of the fact that you put data up there in a cloud is not going to happen. It's just a pre-check.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Phil. But Phil, I noticed you posed 2 questions, so maybe you can merge them or group them and ask one long question.
Sure. Okay. So the first question is around fraud. So in terms of the business case, whether reduction in fraud is a benefit, and if there's been any work done to quantify that. And yeah. So as I said, the figure of 110 billion, particularly because most of our research to date has been around maritime, so it's estimated at about 110 billion euros. So it's certainly quite a big factor. Do you want me to merge that with the one around the question around IT and legacy systems as well in terms of questions?
Well, maybe a short reflection by Leah or Alexio, and then we can actually jump to the second question.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I think that it's still for me. It's when we did the impact assessment, we didn't really specifically look at fraud. So if we would add that, probably then the benefits would be even higher. But we look more at errors, that might occur. Just the fact that you typed wrongly a postal address, some number or name, that's already quite a big factor of creating additional costs. But we didn't look at intentional errors or hiding data related to fraud. And maybe we will have to look at later if we consider to make it mandatory for the economic operators, because obviously as long as the requirements to have the data available electronically is not a mandatory thing for the operators, then those probably that would like to commit fraud might still stay on with paper or claim that their papers got lost or whatever, so they will not be presenting them. So I guess the possibility of tackling fraud on a wide scale would come if we make mandatory the use of electronic for keeping this data and making it available to the authorities. That's when I see it. And indeed, then we could see the numbers when it comes to benefits growing significantly as well.
Maybe you can continue, Phil, with the second question, or?
Yes, around if I can say the word, interoperability. So one of the things that we see, particularly around maritime, which is where my head's in mostly at the moment, is it seems that having to find a way of getting IT systems and legacy paper-based systems to work side by side for some period of time seems highly likely. And then all the issues around how can you prove that a paper document has the same equivalent content to a computer record, and all the issues around auditing to make sure that the two are equivalent. Is that something that with freight in Europe you think is likely to be a factor as well?
Well, that's on the one hand, the legal equivalence of document is more a issue of obviously for courts. So especially when you have a contract right in electronic format, and they need to determine whether that's acceptable. I mean, it's a trusted form of keeping the data. From the FTI perspective, we're not covering the legal equivalence of the contract itself, but rather, I mean, as a business-to-business document, or when the data is it's a business-to-business contract, but we're rather looking for the acceptance from an administrative point of view, so authorities accepting the data. But obviously, we did a research and also on making it mandatory to courts as well, and we realized that that's beyond competencies at EU level because it's about private law and the freedom of courts to decide what is an acceptable proof in court. But based on the same assessment, we concluded that at least electronic form, if we have very clear requirements for authenticity, likely it will be accepted also by courts. So even if we set requirements for administrative purposes, it will also go for contractual purposes. They'll be accepted as well. And definitely, actually, an electronic, at least based on the FT requirements, the electronic format will be much more trustworthy, because you could see, based on the requirements, actually, all the logs of who had put the data, who had modified the data, when. So because everybody needs to be duly identified, authenticated when they're doing any operation on the platforms. So in that sense, and the authorities should have access to those logs to see in case so there's dispute, to understand who has done what. So in that sense, likely the electronic format will become more in a sense, trustworthy than a piece of paper that now, you have no idea who signed it, when it was filled in, etc. However, because the legacy is paper, I guess, they will indeed, you're very right, they will continue to coexist. We also envisage and we're looking at business processes where you have transport operations where in the same means of transport, be it truck or train or whatever you have, plane, barge, you have more consignments. Some of them may have data available electronically on an FT platform, and others would just still be accompanied by paper documents. And we're also trying to see how to allow that still, because for a period, they will coexist as long as the operators can still use paper. So that's we envisage that, but I cannot tell you exactly right now how that would work and if that would solve the issue of the paper document. However, if you want to know if we print a document from an FT platform and you present it, then of course there will always have to be the unique identification link that eventually that could be also accessible at a later stage electronic. So you can take a picture or something like an authority, and then can access the data later and then see all the logs. So that's how you can check if a printed paper document is trustworthy or not. And then there are later on verifiable credentials that maybe might make this process even easier, but let's not go there. It's what we're looking at. This is something that is coming, and we're taking that into account.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so looking at the other questions based on the FIFO approach, there's a question from Elvina, but Elvina, perhaps I'm going to give the floor to our guest here because your question concerns the lack of market readiness, and I would like to merge this question with Tim's question because he also asked about the barriers and acceptance, which is a similar question as well. So I will give the floor to Tim to repeat his question from the chat box, and Tim asked two questions as well. So Tim, if you can couple these questions or group them together, that would be very much appreciated.
Okay, sure. So I think the biggest challenge for getting these things running is where official agencies can reject electronic documentation. So we even see some countries in Europe requesting original documentation as proof of export. We see the use of documentation to slow the process of payments up. And while we have these things, the rollout, I saw the lady's question about why rollout is slow. While these are genuine barriers to implementation of electronic data, then it'll basically stop everybody using it. You don't want to run two systems. So you want to either be running an electronic system or you want to be running a paper one. Running them together is not really beneficial. So as soon as we have government agencies or big shippers that are demanding original or fully sets of delivery documentation, then you stop the gain and therefore you stop the implementation. So for me, it's really important that the agencies, the government agencies, agree across EU that original documentation is no longer a requirement and cannot be a requirement, so that we can move these things a lot faster. Because while those barriers are in place, then we won't get the progress. Yeah. And I think, is that part of your planning, is to make sure that this regulation is across EU, is fully understood? Electronic documentation will be the end game for everybody, because of that I think it's very slow to implement.
Thank you. Tomas, I will take it first, and then because it's indeed linked to the regulation, but maybe if Alexio would like to add there. But yes, I mean, that was the main reason, as I explained also in the beginning, that because what do you call the agencies in the member states basically would not accept. They were demanding still paper, and that's what the regulation makes very clear. If this information is provided electronically from an FT platform, and basically a certified an FT platform can only call itself an FT platform if it has a certification. And we'll also have in place a way, to check the certification of the platform. So if that is the case, you have no right to ask for the equivalent in an original paper document. Now, that said, there is a caveat, because the scope of the FTI regulation is still rather narrow, where for the time being covering all primarily transport contracts, the information that is in a transport document, so consignment note, of whatever type. So if that is electronic on FT platform, no way they can require the original. But it's only that for the time being. But what I said, we have the revision in mind, because we said let's get this right and see how it works, and then we can expand one by making it mandatory to all operators, because you don't want to make it mandatory while you're not sure that the whole system is working. And second, to expand the range of documents that can be that are covered, or the information. In the end, maybe we don't need to talk about documents. We just used to talk about documents because it's a set of information that it's in one format that was standardized for ease of identification. But in the end, we'll need to talk about information. So
which sort of ties me into the second question, which was about the payment cycles, because a lot of people use this slow movement of payments of paper around Europe to delay the payment cycles. And while they have that benefit, they're going to have less interest in moving to an electronic process that makes payment cycles much quicker and therefore negatively affects their cash flow. Yeah. So my suggestion would be, at the same time as you implement this, you also put a delivery to payment maximum across the member states, so that there's no interest in using the paper process to slow down the payments, because a lot of big shippers are paying really, really slow terms. They won't want to go to these and they're the ones that will drive the market. If they see they're going to have to make payments 30 or 60 days faster, they're not exactly going to be motivated to support the process. So I know it's a slightly separate topic, but in terms of barriers to implementation, this payment cycle is a really key part of why paper keeps running, because people love to slow the payment cycles down. Yeah. So anyway, something for us separately to have a little think about in your project. So thanks anyway.
Thank you. I mean, that's something that for the time being we cannot address. We also have to see what the market is doing, I think, and that's why maybe I said that maybe Alexio would like to come in here from the it also, I think it depends on the contractual relations. I mean, you can sign a contract and say, no, I mean, if I have proof that the goods have been delivered, then you have, real-time proof that they have been delivered, then, it's like contractually you can negotiate, what's the time for payment, I would say. But that's just
it's a slightly topic, I accept. Yeah.
I see also Alexio would like to react.
Yeah, I would just add the fact that, I mean, the two barriers that you mentioned, Tim, they are for sure, two valid barriers to that. And why the vision is to already, in a way, to reflect on extending this exactly, to reduce, the single barrier, because if we stay limited in the scope of what is really only FT, I had the impression that there are barriers that could slow down a bit. Even, the first you mentioned and the second for sure. The more you extend this and cross, the opportunities, making a win-win situation for the different supply chain actors, the more you reduce the barriers. It's a general concept, but it is for me the way to go for sure. But you mentioned that two very concrete examples, Tim.
Yeah, but I think we need to bear in mind that FT will not solve everything from the start, but indeed, it's a start. And we're trying to make it in a way that will allow to expand it, so they expand the use both in the business to business domain and also in the business to authorities domain. So that's what we can do at this point in time.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much also for the questions and the answers. Next in the FIFO approach, we have Yannis. Yannis, if you would like to take the floor.
Yes, thank you. The question that I have, it's mentioned in the directive, and it's also mentioned over here on the slides, that if you want to report electronically, you will have to use an FT certified platform. But to me, coming from the inland waterway transport sector, this seems somewhat incompatible with the current legislation that we have in IWT on electronic reporting. So this is a technical service from the River Information Services that is used a lot. So a lot of cargo is reported from the business to the authorities by electronic means already in inland shipping. even over country borders with very nice exchanges between the countries, between the authorities. But of course, this is currently not via an FT certified platform. So I am wondering how these two things relate to each other. Also, because from as far as I can see, the legislation that is covered by FT and the legislation that is covered by ERI are also not 100% the same. So there is partial overlap, but not a complete overlap. And if we will no longer be allowed to use ERI in inland waterway transportation once FT becomes applicable, I think there will be a lot of trouble.
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I'm happy to actually be able to give you a rather detailed answer to that, because we have been working quite closely with the inland waterway sector in the DTLF, so we're very much aware of that. And we're also working closely with our colleagues here in the Commission that are responsible for the RIS directive, which basically covers the ERI messages. And you're very right in pointing out that the scope of both the RIS directive and the FTI, they deal with the electronic format of the information on cargo. Now, and indeed, there is a partial overlap in scope. And what we have decided, because when we're looking, because as you could see from the list of EU legislation, the RIS directive is not covered. I mean, it's not as part of scope of FT, because again, they're the same type of legislation. But where we could have an overlap is information notifications that are required by national legislation. So that's covered by the RIS directive. And actually, when looking at it, we have decided that when adding to the national requirements to the scope of the FTI, we will leave out the national requirements that fall already under the scope of the RIS directive. So in principle, they should fall under the scope of FT, but we decided to keep them separate in order to not to create confusion, and basically to have two EU legal acts having the same purpose, covering the same information requirements. However, you may be aware there is the RIS directive right now. It's being revised. So there is an evaluation has taken place. There is an impact assessment. We work closely with our colleagues as well. And to my knowledge, the recommended approach and the way the RIS directive will be amended is that the requirements for ERI would be that they would use also, so there'll be somewhat adaptation, mostly linked to the data, maybe. I mean, a bit of in order to ensure interoperability, and possibly, of course, some requirements when it comes to authorization, identification, etc. But likely they will not require too much changes. But the idea would be to keep the data on an FT platform, but continue to use the ERI message. I mean, to notify the information to the authorities. But the same information, when it's required for purposes of legislation that falls under the scope of FT, but not RIS, then they are available in FT, and then they are made available only upon request. So that's how the way we would go for it, so that we keep two different legal bases, but basically we both will refer to the same systems of at least in terms of where to keep the data. Then for ERI, you have to push them all the data, whereas with FT you don't. You just keep it there, or you notify the link and see And my understanding is that we know that the RIS Comments projects, we've been very, we had contacts, we had presentations, discussions, and they see a high compatibility. So basically, the RIS systems could be RIS Comments. Yeah, I can't recall now how it's called more precisely, but it could be working both as an FT platform, but also as an access for the authorities. So that's something that we'd like to accommodate as well within the FTA specifications.
For your information, the output of RIS Comex is used to be BizRIS, now it's EURIS, and I believe ALSIC is the software developer behind EURIS, actually. Correct me if I'm wrong, Yannis.
Yeah, we are the ones that implemented EURIS, correct. And also very related to this is CIRIS, so the Central and Eastern European Reporting Information Service or System. So this is they both have a lot to do with the electronic reporting. That's also why I was asking the question.
For your information, Yanis and also Leah and Alexio, we are, as Alice, also involved in the revision of the risk directive. So we had meetings also with Nick Delmer from the IWC Europe as well. And we were also involved in the combined transportation directive, which also is going to cover inland waterways besides railways, which used to be mainly railway oriented. So I think this is a good evolution, I would say, that we are all going the right direction, mainly focusing on the interoperability between different modes, not only within the mode, as in unimodal optimization, but it should be intermodal, multimodal, synchromodal, combined, co-modal, whatever you call it. It needs to be involved in more modes of transportation, of course. But also we have some upcoming meetings with ALSIC as well, so we can also clarify these things in the upcoming meetings. Okay, so we have 2 more minutes. I would say that let's give the floor to one more question, a burning question if there is any, because I haven't noticed now from the chat box. There are some references to DCSA as well, but we will also have the DCSA upcoming webinar where we can take up these questions together with Hanane, also from UNC Fact. Okay, I see something popping up from Anders.
But I think we had Tim Phillips' questions that we didn't address, did we? He had.
He had 2 questions. I think we grouped them. I think they have been addressed.
Yeah, it's about the obviously technology takes time to set, and we're heavily invested in technology. That's what we're doing in the road freight sector. We need visibility of what the data set is, over what time frame it's coming, what needs to be in that data set as soon as possible, because these things take years to set up. Yeah, so if there's an agreed data set, what it's covering, it would be really great to have visibility of that across not just us, but of course other people investing in technology. Yeah. I don't know if that exists yet, or when we're likely to be able to see that.
That's in the process of making. It's almost finalized. At least covering the EU requirements, because we knew, but we're also then mapping now the national requirements through that as well. So basically by the summer we should have this. Actually, we'll let you know. We will also publish it for public feedback before it's adopted by the Commission. So it will be a 4-week period in which these specifications will be published for public feedback, and we can inform, for example, Tomas, and then we can.
In that regard, Leah, indeed, you can notify me or anybody from Alice, and we will then forward it to all the Alice members for feedback to let them know and make them aware. So it'd be very much appreciated if you could do it. Okay,
Thanks
perfect.
very much. Yeah.
So we have approached the end. It's already 11:30. So I would like to thank both our speakers, Alexio and Leah, also for your time. It was very informative, and also for asking all the questions. So kudos to you, audience. I'm happy it was quite interactive, because sometimes we have these kind of sessions that everybody is quiet, but today was very interactive. So I appreciate that as well.